Hello, everybody. My name is John Winston. I am the Director of State and Local Political Programs. It's a mouthful at NAR. And for this purposes, I am your host, MC for the Apex training program. I am very happy today because we have some wonderful guests for you to learn about the using independent expenditures to change your legislative environment. Let me first note that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will try to monitor them as much as possible and respond to them. So let me also introduce our presenters today. First up is Allie Perkins, who since 2019 has been the GAD of the Phoenix Realtors, a mega board with over 11,000 members. And when she is not keeping an eye on the Phoenix City Council, which she does a good job at, she enjoys traveling, meeting new people, trying new restaurants, playing with her two corgis, and of course, talking with the GAD community. We are also joined by Mitchell Norton, my colleague at NAR. He's the manager of state and local independent expenditure programs, who during his 8+ years at NAR has worked on over 3,000 or so IE grants with GADs across the country. Prior to joining NAR, Mitchell was a successful campaign manager and consultant for numerous state and local campaigns in his home state of Florida and around the country, he's a proud Florida Gator, I know as well. He's got a master's degree in political management from there. And fun fact about Mitchell is he's also an excellent musician who's currently leads the group 5 out of 4. Is that 5 of 4? Who I think you can get on Apple iTunes as recordings for those that are interested in his musical musings. So with that, like I said, if you have questions for the panelists as they go through their presentations, put it in the Q&A and we'll try to answer it when we take a moment of breath. So with that, Mitchell, you're in the box. You're up to bat, buddy. Go ahead.
Well, fantastic. Thanks, John, for that introduction. As he said, my name is Mitchell Norton. I am the manager of state and local independent expenditures here at NAR. So first things first, what is an independent expenditure campaign? Well, when you think of independent expenditure campaigns, think candidate campaigns. So John runs issues mobilization campaigns through the issues mobilization program. When it's an issue, I run candidate campaigns. And for our purposes, independent expenditure is sort of shorthand for a candidate campaign. And what that means is that, in typical campaign politics, you've got the candidate and their campaign staff and their team running a campaign to get them elected. Well, NAR and you folks at the state and local associations will pick candidates that you believe are great for governors, state senate, state house, city council, mayor, etc. And you'll want to help those folks get elected. But we have these pesky things called campaign contribution limits, where if you wanted to help candidate X get elected to the city council, you might only be able to give them $5,000 to help their effort, or $500 probably more accurately, to get elected. But you might want to do more. So we put together a whole separate campaign that could be a few $1,000s, even more so, to help that candidate get elected with direct mail, digital advertising, text messages, phone calls, most things that are in the campaign menu, we can do in some way, shape, or form to help that candidate get elected. But we can't coordinate those efforts with that campaign, hence the independent aspect of independent expenditures. So why do we do independent expenditure campaigns? Well, this will still be the thing I run around bragging about. This was in 2017. We did a $10,000 independent expenditure campaign for a candidate named David Yancey. He was a state house candidate in Virginia. His election ended in a tie. So if we hadn't spent that $10,000, he would have at least lost by 1 vote, probably more. So we helped get him that tie. And then in Virginia, ties are broken by drawing names out of a hat. I'm not kidding. And his name got drawn out of the hat. And he became, or continued to be, the state house candidate or the state house member in Virginia for 2 more years, thanks in large part to our efforts. So how successful are we at this? Well, we win. You know, we have just over a 70% success rate. We count wins and runoffs as successes, which, you know, is a pretty, you know, I don't know how to compare it to how other associations do, but I didn't even have a 75% win rate when I was a campaign manager on the ground, and I like to think I was brilliant. So, so let's get into sort of the nuts and bolts of how the program works, and I'll try to get through these as quickly as I can, because it can get a little dry if I linger. So the application process is, the first things you need to know are what your allocation is for your state and local association, what happens before you fill out an application, how we set up a strategic timeline or a tactical timeline, what the application looks like, what the approval timeline looks like, and then what happens after your application gets approved. So first, let's go into your allocation. So unlike the issues mobilization program, where there's a block of money and every association around the country can kind of dip into it, and it's a first come, first serve sort of situation, we actually take the big bucket of funds that we have at the beginning of every year and divide it up amongst the states based on your number of members. We set aside 30% of it for a non-allocated pot, which I will go over later. But the other 70% is divided up approximately $4.45 per member in your state, equals your state's allocation. And then from there, so say you've got 50,000 members, you've got $222,500 for 2023. And that will translate into your state's funds, which then get divided among state and local association. So you'll have 50% of it will be for state races and 50% of it will be for local races. So if you want to jump down 2 slides, that will give us, there we go. So you divide it up, you got just over 111,000 for your state, and just over 1,100,000, or just over 111,000 for local races, divided up for the year. Obviously, your state races are your governor and other state executives, state house, state senate. Sometimes you've got multi-county races or multi-county candidates, like the state attorney's offices and things like that. Your local races are mayor, city council, county commission, things like that. And then you've got these non-allocated funds. So we set aside about 30% of the year's budget for non-allocated funds. These are so that if your state gets $50,000 for the year because you're a relatively smaller state, you can blow through that in one mayoral campaign. So we want to be able to provide you with some resources in case you have a bigger race that maybe uses up your entire allocation and you need a little bit more to help get you to the finish line. These funds are used once you've already depleted your allocation and are on a first come, first serve basis. And the criteria for approval on those is the same criteria that you would use for allocated funds. So things you need to think about before you fill out an application or before you even call me, which we'll get into that theme here in a minute, is this a nonpartisan election? Most local elections are nonpartisan races. Even if you as a local GAD know that this is the Republican and this is the Democrat, they don't run on a party ticket, so they're nonpartisan races. Whereas your state house and state senate, governor's elections are usually partisan races. You've got a Republican and Democratic primary, and then Republican versus Democrat general election. So when is the election? obviously, we need to know when the election is. If we don't know when the election is, there's not really anything we can do. There's no other conversation we can have. Similar to that, when does voting start? 20 years ago, those were the same question. Now, with the proliferation of early voting and the predominance of vote by mail, we need to know if the majority of your votes, states' votes, are going to be cast prior to a month before election day. Because if we can't get an application approved for you until 3 weeks before election day, but most of your votes have already been cast, we have to take that into consideration when deciding whether or not we'll be able to approve such an application. So is this a primary or general election? Again, this sort of goes back to the nonpartisan race aspect of things. We need to know if we're going to be targeting Republicans, or if we're going to be targeting Democrats, or if it's a general election, if we're going to be trying to target a weird kind of amalgamation of both. What else is on the ballot? This year we've got state house and state senate races in the state of Virginia. There's nothing really else on the ballot, so we know that these candidates are going to be driving folks to the polls. But like, if you were a city council candidate on the ballot in November of 2020, you were not the predominant reason why people were going to the polls. People were going to the polls to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And our goal in that situation was to figure out how to get those people to keep voting all the way down the ticket to then vote for your candidate. But say this November, where we've got state house and state senate candidates who are the only ones on the ballot in Virginia, we have to actually get people to go to the polls and then also vote for our candidates. And then what other unique factors are at play? Are there scandals going on? Did somebody cheat on their taxes? Did somebody fill out the wrong filing forms? Is there going to be a legal challenge to the validity of somebody being on the ballot? Is your candidate a write-in candidate? We had one of those a couple of years ago. Just kind of unique things that are going to impact how this election unfolds. So then, once you've answered all those questions for yourself, you're going to email or call me, preferably emailing. I am technically a millennial, so I don't talk on the phone. But you can email me or call me, and we will talk through those various questions and then what you want and need for your campaign. So to give you an idea of your timeline for when you should be talking to me. So if you want to do a poll, and I will stress that polling is not for every race. We can only poll some of the larger campaigns. If you want to do a poll, come to me and ask, and sometimes I might tell you that we won't be able to do it. But we will always run numbers and see if we can. But if you want to do a poll, you need to talk to me 12 weeks or more before your election. If you want to do mail, you're going to 7 weeks. If you're going to want to do online, also 7 weeks. And with phones, 4 weeks. That also includes text messaging packages. If you were to want to do text messaging, also 4 weeks. So the reason for that is this nice little chart, which kind of details for you what the timeline of a campaign that does polling would look like. There's a lot here, and a lot goes into actually putting together a good campaign. It can't just be thrown together with 30 days left. We can do a little bit if there's a last minute sort of situation, but this is what I think an ideal calendar for an election looks like. And to that end, we have success the more time we get. We did put together this nice little demonstration of, if you talk to me 150 days or more before your election, we have won every single time. Now, I think that's like 2 campaigns. So I don't know that it's a statistically valid sample there, but there is a clear trend here that the more time you give us, the more likely it is that we'll be able to win your election. And that the reason for that is obvious. We can do more online, we can do more mail, we can poll it, we can plan better if we have more time. So this one's kind of a new slide to our presentation, which is PAC usage. So NAR fund is going to run some of your elections. Some of your elections are going to be run through your state's association's PAC, and some of them are going to run through your own PAC. That's a conversation we'll have to have during that initial phone conversation. There are benefits and downsides to each. Using the NAR fund as the disclaimer, that's when the piece of mail comes out, there's a nice little disclaimer down there at the bottom. It's going to say paid for and approved by National Association of Realtors Fund. The benefit there is that we will pay the vendor directly. There's little or no compliance aspect that your association will have to handle, but it will say National Association of Realtors Fund on the disclaimer. Or you could use your state association's PAC. I know that in states like Tennessee, they have a state PAC called My Home, My Tennessee, where the local associations will work with the state association, and we will make a contribution to My Home, My Tennessee, and then they will run the independent expenditure campaign in coordination with NAR. The benefit there is, again, it says My Home, My Tennessee on the disclaimer. It doesn't look like the big bad national association is coming in and interfering in your local politics. And the third option is that you could start your own PAC. Ideally, this is something you would have done before we talk on the phone, because it does take a little bit to set up your own PAC, but obviously this gets things even more local. You can have paid for and approved by the Phoenix Realtors Association rather than even Arizona. It gets more local, but again, that shifts compliance responsibilities onto your associations, which you might not be equipped with at the staff level to have happen. That's something, again, we'll talk about in those initial conversations to determine which is the best option. Which vendor are we going to use? Most of you are going to use our in-house vendor called Real Strategies. For those of you who know the players there, that's Christine Berger, that's Justin Allen, that's Julian Ulick, you know, the realtor favorites. They will put together a budget and run the entire campaign for you, and then we will either NAR will pay them via NAR fund, per the previous slide, or your PAC will pay them. The other option is that you'll use your own vendor. Some states and associations have their own vendors that they prefer to use. The only requirement is that NAR has to see their proposal, know that their pricing is comparable to Real Strategies, and then vet the materials to make sure that it's not your cousin's laptop designing mail on Photoshop, which I've done before, and it's not good. From there, and this is where we get into all the internet fun. So you've talked to me. We know that you're going to use Real Strategies. You're going to use NAR fund. So now you have to get into the actual application process. The application can be found at realtorparty.realtor/programs-independent expenditures. I would have put the link in there, but you can't click on it. So there's no point in putting a link there. But this is the pathway to find it. And this is what the page looks like. So from there, you're going to get to the independent expenditures page, and you'll see this menu down there, which will bring you to, there's a polling form if you're going to do a poll. If I've told you that polling is doable, or that might be doable, you're going to fill out this polling request form. It's super easy. This is what it looks like. Some of the main questions you're going to get asked on here, it's a very quick form, are you have to give us you and your association's information. If it's a state or local race, candidate's name, what office they're seeking. When you tell us what office they're seeking, please make sure that if it's a district, that you tell us what the district number is. If you just say it's a district race and don't tell us what district they're running in, we can't really run the analysis. I say that because that happens more often than you think. So you can just skip right through all these. And so that moves us on to, so now we've polled it, or I told you that it's not pollable. So if it's not pollable, you skip over all those slides that you just saw about polling. Or if we've already finished the poll, you're going to do this step, which is you're going to click and fill out the pre-application budget request. What this allows us to do is to send a form with the information to Real Strategies so that they can pull budget numbers for what it's going to cost to do a campaign in your race. So that information includes, again, your association's information, candidate's name, the office they're seeking. Same comment about districts, city or county, what race their office, if it's a general, special, runoff election, when the election date is. So now you fill out your pre-application budget request. I've sent you a budget recommendation. You have agreed with me that the budget makes sense. You have told me that I'm the most brilliant campaign manager on the face of the earth and that this makes absolute sense. Or you have taken my campaign plan and said, Mitchell, you're insane. You don't know what the people of Phoenix want. I have a better idea. Both are acceptable options. I have no ego. You can't hurt me. So now it's time to actually fill out the application itself. You fill out the grant application. It looks like this. I am not going to take you through all the questions that get asked on this form because I don't want this to be a 2-hour webinar. But it's similar questions to, you can go back if you want, if you go back, please. It's similar questions to what you had before, but here is the common mistake. And I flagged this because it happens 50 times a year. There is a question on the first page that says, the Realtor Association making the request. For some of you who work at the state association, when you're filling out a request on behalf of your locals, your instinct here is to put your state association's name in here because that's who you work for. But if you're say the North Carolina Association of Realtors and you're filling out an application for Wilmington on behalf of the Wilmington Association, then you need to put the Wilmington Association's name. I think it's actually called Cape Fear Association in this line, not North Carolina. If it's a local race, there needs to be a local association with jurisdiction listed here. It's a common mistake. I'll help you fix it if you make it, but just trying to head off that little delay if we end up in that situation. So we approve applications every week. The application deadline is weekly at on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. It will then subsequently go to a subcommittee of my committee members and then my full committee. And then once it's been approved by my full committee, it'll be approved at 5 p.m. on Monday. There are some exceptions to this. Those include if there are special elections with fast turnarounds, if there's a runoff election that might, we finished our election on Tuesday and we couldn't get our application filled out for the runoff that's in 2 weeks until, Wednesday night. I might try to fast track your application straight to the full committee so that we don't lose time in that kind of a setting. If you need one of those exceptions, you will have to talk to me in advance. It's not something we try to, set up on a quick turnaround. So once your application is approved, you'll get a fun little email that looks like this. This is a race we actually did earlier this year that is completed, so I'm not breaking any independent expenditure rules here by showing it to you. Once you receive this email, I will have CC'd Real Strategies on this message. So now Real Strategies knows that this application has been approved. So then you're going to get an application that looks like this from Real Strategies. It'll include the budget that you will have seen and included on your application, but now it'll include an actual timeline of when you're going to start seeing your direct mail, when you're going to start seeing your online ads for you to approve, and what day you're going to see them, and what day they have to be approved, and then what day they're going to launch or drop. And then again, if you have issues with that calendar, you look at it and say, well, I was actually planning on going on vacation that week, and I'm not going to be available to approve communication. That's fine. We know you all have personal lives. Although I would say if you're a government affairs director going on vacation in October of an election year, there's a small part of me that will resent you, only because I was never allowed to do it myself. If you chose to use your PAC instead of NAR's PAC, you'll get an email that looks slightly different from me in the congratulations. It includes this nice little section here that you absolutely have to pay attention to, which is that when you're using your own PAC, what that's going to mean is that because your own PAC is responsible for handling all the compliance, your vendor or Real Strategies, depending on who you use, is going to send you an invoice. You have to pay that invoice. NAR will wire you funds as a contribution, but you have to pay the invoice. But if we never receive that invoice, if we never receive that request for contribution via that invoice from you, we won't have wired you any money. And if we don't receive that by 14 days after the actual election that you were approved for, then we no longer have an obligation to make that contribution to your PAC. Again, it's literally something that has never happened, but I have to make sure that you all are aware of it. My continued stress of it is one of the reasons why it's never happened. So this is what the budget will look like from Real Strategies. It's nice and easy. Next slide. Like I said, it'll tell you when everything's supposed to drop. It'll also include a tab, next slide, which will tell you when everything is due. Again, if you're planning on going on vacation or something during some of these times, let us know and we'll alter these timings, or we'll figure out who can approve things in your stead. Or if you're going on vacation somewhere with a Wi-Fi connection, you can sit on the beach and approve them. I don't actually care where you are when you approve things, as long as they get approved. And then it's the same email. If you decide to use your own vendor, it'll just list that the invoices are payable. That again, you have to send invoice to us once your vendor has sent them to you, so that we can make sure you get paid. From there, you'll start getting mail. This is examples of what it looks like. Again, these are races that happened years ago, so I'm not breaking any rules here. Nice little landscapes, candid headshot, listing of the proper issues. The issues that we can talk about on communication are realtor-friendly issues. We are not going to talk about guns. We are not going to talk about choice. We are not going to talk about civil rights, LGBTQ issues, voting rights issues. The rule of thumb is that if you can look me in the eye and keep a straight face and tell me that the issue you want to talk about is a realtor issue, then we might be able to do it. Although if you can look me in the eye and keep a straight face where you're talking to me about one of those controversial issues, I might think you're a sociopath. Then we've got, again, we got online ads, and then like what a phone script is going to look like. So this was the quick and dirty of what the application process and what independent expenditure campaigns are. And I will throw it back over to Ali to go over more practically how it's used.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mitchell. So Mitchell just covered some great information, and I plan to talk about how I used a lot of those rules and guidelines to implement a successful independent expenditure on Phoenix's end. I just want to put another quick plug in if you have any questions throughout, to put your questions in the Q&A, and our lovely moderator, John, will try to get to them and keep an eye on them as the presentation goes on. So today I'm going to talk about some independent expenditures that we ran in Phoenix. So we ran 3 independent expenditures between November 2022 and our runoff in March 2023. So I'm going to give a little bit of context about why we made those decisions and kind of go over the structure of our council and what made sense. I'm also happy to talk a little bit more in detail if someone has questions about when it's appropriate to use an independent expenditure based on what's going on with the makeup of your council and whether or not your members have some footing with the council. But in terms of specific decision-making that went into whether or not we wanted to utilize an IE. So this article on the left talks a little bit about the incumbent that was running for re-election in November 2022, who we chose as the target of our independent expenditure. So this spotlight kind of talks a little bit about how he was primarily focused on policing and was dancing around the issue of defund the police on the Phoenix City Council, which I will not get into today. Again, I can't keep a straight face to save my life. So Mitchell, we're good, don't worry. But we have, like a lot of your communities, a severe housing crisis. And because there was not a lot of unity on the city council, there was a lot of ideological fracture and sects that specifically prioritize some issues over others. And I would characterize this incumbent as being a troublemaker in that realm, and this disunity was not allowing us to make any progress on our housing shortage as the city of Phoenix. That and this particular council member was not very open to hearing from our association. He never once met with me or any of our members while he was in office. Whenever we had expertise to share on a specific ordinance, he never, picked up the phone. His door was never open. So the candidate selection committee that our association ultimately put together felt like he would be a good target to replace on Phoenix City Council. I'd say about 90% of the time, though, it's very risky to unseat an incumbent. And I'm sure Mitchell and John, you have really accurate statistics on this, but incumbents get reelected about 90% of the time, if not more. So backing a challenger is something inherently very risky. And we wanted to utilize the help of NAR to increase our chances of being able to support this candidate. Next slide, please. So the candidate committee, after inviting both the incumbent Carlos Garcia and the challenger to interview, to fill out a questionnaire and interview with our group, the incumbent decided not to even come and talk to our group, but the challenger was very excited about getting to know what's important to the realtors and championing housing. So the selection committee ultimately decided to back her in the general election. But getting past the general election was going to be an uphill battle. So Mitchell mentioned polling as a tool to understand the landscape a little bit better. So I'm going to be talking about our runoff independent expenditure for the most part throughout this presentation. You can just stay on that slide for a second. But I want to talk just briefly about the general election independent expenditure that we did. So first, we had to get her past the general election. Our candidate was Keisha Hodge Washington. And as you can see at the top, American Strategies did a little bit of polling analysis for us. And initially, it looked like our candidate, Keisha Hodge Washington, would not get past the general without intervention. You can see that highlighted circle had her at 16%. And so we needed to intervene with some messaging that would help voters who were undecided or unaware of her, better understand what she was about and how she could bring more unity and stability to the council. So on the bottom left here is a real life example of a budget and a strategy that Real Strategies gave us in order to help push her across the finish line. I actually was contacted by a couple of lobbyists and a couple of other organizations like the Chamber of Commerce who told me that supporting Keisha Hodge Washington would be a mistake, that going against an incumbent would only further enrage him against our association, and that we shouldn't bother. But I like to play it fast and loose, and I like taking risks, especially if it's going to pay off for our members. And on the bottom right here is how Keisha fared on election night in November 2022. That was very fun to see. She surprised a lot of people, but I don't think she surprised us after all the research that NAR and American Strategies did, and what we did to support her. So she got past the general. So now going into the runoff election, which was in March of 2023, 4 months later of this year. We repeated the process. I just want to put a quick plug in for polling. I would always look into polling, and Master Norton and NAR will tell you if you're able to utilize it, but it's helpful to just try, and the worst they can say is no. Polling was very helpful in our case because we were able to test what kind of messaging would convince voters to take a chance on Keisha Hodge Washington. So you can see at the top of the slide that before the positive message testing intervention, the race was very close, but successful messaging that resonated with voters was able to push her a lot higher and increase her chance of securing the seat. I've included a little example of what a message test might look like. I believe for the specific poll, we got 5 or 6 different messages, and the strongest messaging will be included in the independent expenditure. Next slide, please. Apologies, the formatting got a little messed up, but this is an example of what our mailers and our online ads look like. So based on the budget and the strategy that NAR and their vendors put together for us, they felt that our campaign would have the most success within a certain universe if it were sent to a little over 6,000 voters and 5,000 households, some online ads that reach a specific group of people that are most likely to vote in a municipal election. And I think it's on the next slide here, but yes, thank you so much. This is a really detailed breakdown of how the ad performs. And what's cool about these independent expenditures is the vendors that NAR uses, Real Strategies, Access Production. They're very great in working with you and helping you customize an independent expenditure that's most likely to help you succeed. What I think is really special about this particular detailed explanation of how the ads performed is that if you look on the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that the click-through rate, or the amount of times that people actually click the ad to learn more about her and go to the landing page, is quite above average in terms of industry standards. So a general click-through rate that is at industry standard is about 0.1%. So 0.17% is great. So we had some great engagement, which I believe ultimately helped push her over the edge and get people to learn more about her and ultimately vote for her. Next slide. So here's my very scientific and technical explanation of what relationships were like on the council for us before we decided to before we started this IE process. Disclaimer, this is an important disclaimer. Choosing to pursue an independent expenditure can and will cause waves in the political community, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So this is what the makeup of our council looked like before. We were targeting C8 specifically in this runoff IE. Next slide. And this is what our council looked like after we decided to do an independent expenditure. So in terms of the dynamic of the council, the councilman that was rerunning for his seat for District 8 was a very outspoken member of a minority sect of the council that brought a lot of dysfunction. And so when we challenged his reelection, that also caused a ripple effect. And some of the other council members, banded with him to, stick up for him and try to keep him in a seat so that they can continue to try to push the policies that they championed on our council. And they saw us trying to get rid of him as a threat, rightfully so. So two of these council members, 5 and 7, were actually council members that we contributed to their campaigns, but were now, because of this, i.e. speaking out against the realtors, even though they were previously realtor champions. So that made it a little messy, but this is it's important to remember that this is the battle and not the war, right? So in my opinion, it was worth causing consternation amongst the council to try and replace, a toxic, unfocused council member with one that would be a tried and true realtor champion. Next slide. So what was the consequence of ruffling feathers and causing some unrest and anger amongst the council? Well, in February, about 5 weeks before our election, we had a source of income ordinance come out to our council. And unfortunately, the ordinance was adapted from another city, and the ordinance was written for renters, but applied to both renters and buyers. So the association, concerned about how the ordinance was written, brought it to the council, each council member, and the council members that were previously our realtor champions, but were now very upset and angry that we were actively trying to unseat one of their allies, decided that they would not hear us out and our concerns about how an ordinance written for renters would have, unintended consequences for buyers with this new legislation. Next slide. I think they might have been skipped, but so essentially there were a lot of attacks on social media about this, a lot of unrest. I also want to mention that the considerations for whether or not you use the National Association of Realtors Fund versus your own PAC can definitely have an impact if your involvement in the race gets a lot of social media attention. Like, for example, we had one particular Twitter warrior that kept talking about how NAR was putting dark money into these races to try to unseat this particular council member. But I include these because the person on the top right of that tweet was a council member that was previously a champion for us and decided to start disparaging the realtors in public and on social media. So she will be the target of our next independent expenditure. But I wanted to relay that something like this can be risky and potentially public, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is an unfruitful endeavor. Next slide, please. So what happened with the source of income ordinance? So we had enough council members that were upset with us for trying to unseat the incumbent that they did not take our calls. They did not want to come and sit with us at the table and understand our concerns about the source of income ordinance. And the mayor and some of the other members of the council bowed to this pressure to pass this ordinance. So unfortunately, we lost that battle. But Next slide, please. I like to say that we won the war because we were able to unseat that very toxic and unhelpful candidate. And I put the totals of the campaign contributions and NAR independent expenditures that we used to help us achieve that goal. So Keisha Hodge Washington was our challenger on the right, pictured here. She is now the best champion on the council for us. We were a part of her kitchen cabinet, her transition team, and she regularly asks us for our association's opinion on ordinances that are going through the city council and future plans that could impact the housing industry. So I just wanted to put this out here to give you an understanding of what these kinds of funds can look like for each independent expenditure and how it can help. So after putting $160,000 worth of independent expenditures and campaign contributions, we were able to significantly change the culture of the council, which is great. I also want to put in one more quick plug for American Strategies. On the left, wait, keep on that current slide. On the left, we have some initial polling that they gave us before, at the very beginning of the process, before we started the independent expenditure. And so for both Keisha Hodge Washington and Kevin Robinson, who was the other third independent expenditure that we embarked on, that I didn't really talk about too much for this specific presentation. But I just wanted to speak to how accurate their data was. So with the intervention of positive messaging, the 56 and 62% figure was predicted by American Strategies, and the results on the right is what we saw the morning after the runoff election. So they have some pretty good data, and knowledge is power, right? If you have any opportunity to get more knowledge about your opponent, about the person you're backing, I highly recommend exploring every single avenue that you can. And the worst they can say is no, right? That's my philosophy. Next slide, please. So back to my very highly scientific and technical graph. This is what the council looked like when we were in the process of unseating the incumbent. And next slide, please. This is what our council looks like today. So members 4, 5, 7, and 8 were all part of the troublesome sect of the council that was causing a lot of problems. And 2 out of 4 of them have now left for greener pastures to try for Congress. We were able to unseat the most problematic and unfocused council member. And we still have 1 angry person left, but that will be our target for 2024. So I want this to be a testament that independent expenditures work. We have great knowledge and resources from NAR and their vendors and the GAD community too, as well. I highly recommend talking to other GADs that have done a couple independent expenditures and have advice for what worked, what didn't. I would utilize all of those, and slowly but surely, cycle by cycle, you can chip away at the council members that are not realtor friendly and replace them with ones that are at least willing to listen to our industry. Next slide, please. And that's all I have. I know I went through it pretty quickly, so I again want to say, if you have any questions about the process in general for Mitchell, or how I decided to utilize those resources, go ahead and put them in the Q&A.
Great. And I might be getting a little feedback here. I'm sorry, I'm working remotely and I think we got some construction going on. But so there are a couple of questions. I don't know, these look like more Mitchell. If you want to take a look at those and maybe answer those verbally, if you haven't done already, and then any others, if you guys can just weigh in. Thanks.
Okay, so I've got, the first question I've got on here is, if the state is using their PAC to do an IE, how do they ensure that it's enough of a firewall between uh, direct PAC contributions and the IE? I mean, that's kind of up to you at your association to determine. My recommendation is that before you start down the path of an independent expenditure, that you and your AE and any other members of your political staff sit down and discuss how to handle independent expenditures, not for a specific candidate, but in the global sense of how to handle independent expenditures, and so that you and one other person on your team will be responsible for independent expenditures. Everybody else will have no knowledge of how independent expenditures are being handled. Okay, the next question. If you're looking to support multiple candidates in the same election, multiple city council members, can that be done as a slate of candidates? Yes. So the short answer is yes. The way we handle something like that is if we do, and for those of you who aren't aware, there are some specifically local associations, usually city council races where, 20 candidates will run and the top 5 candidates, vote getters, will become the 5 members of the city council. It doesn't matter what order they finish in, as long as they're in the top 5, they are now the 5 members. So say so in that race, your association is technically allowed to support 5 candidates. It's a weird idea. Like if you were to be doing a head-to-head race, a Republican versus a Democrat, you'd have to pick one. The rule of thumb is that you are allowed to support as many candidates as are seats available. So if you wanted to support all 5 candidates, that's great. We would have to have a conversation about how you would want to handle that. Do you want to run 5 separate campaigns, or would you like to run a slate where you're going to send out 3 pieces of mail and each mailer is going to have all 5 candidates on them talking about how awesome they are? When you fill out an application for a slate, you fill out 5 different applications. And if you're applying to do a single mail piece for that slate, and that single mail piece costs $10,000, then each of your 5 applications is going to be asking for $2,000 a piece, for a total of $10,000. The same is true of ranked choice voting as of this year. I'm jumping right into that second question. We did pass a rule at NXT or Next, or however we're supposed to refer to that from now on, that we will handle ranked choice voting situations in the same way we handle slate campaigns. The only difference is that on your application for ranked choice voting, you do have to indicate where in the ranking so if you want 3 candidates to support 3 candidates on a ranked choice voting situation, we would put them all on a slate, but you'd have to indicate, like, this is the candidate we want first, this is the candidate we want second, this is the candidate we want third. So that when we're doing a mail piece or digital ads, we're telling people, like, go vote for candidate A. But if they don't win, vote for, but vote this person second and this person third. We're not just going to throw out a slate and tell people to vote in any order they want, because that sort of defeats some of the purpose of how ranked choice campaigning can work.
Sure. And I just want to add too that, slate voting, or, taking the candidates you want to support as a slate doesn't make sense for every single race. And this is something that you can talk to, call Mitchell. You can talk to Mitchell about at NAR and some of your peers. Speaking from my experience in Keisha Hodge Washington's race, the polling that we received back let us know that Keisha Hodge Washington did not have a lot of name awareness, which is why that we had to do a lot of messaging on the front end to even get her past the general. So sometimes including multiple candidates might be confusing and might actually, not help you reach your goals and and get your candidates across the finish line. So again, just consult with our NAR folks, they're experts, and yeah, you can make sure that makes sense for your race.
Well, seeing no additional questions, I want to take this moment to first thank Ali and Mitchell for this great and very informative presentation. Always wonderful to hear from both of them. They both do fabulous jobs for their respective organizations. And I just want to also remind people that on August 11th, in just over 2 weeks, we heard a lot about the polling. Well, we're going to have Joe Good and I believe Sarah Stevenson from American Strategies talk to you a little bit about how to effectively look at and read polls and how you can use them in all the variety of ways. We'll talk a little bit about, give you a little bit more about if, you know, what you can get from NER as far as that. So context of how you can integrate it into your program, but should be a really interesting discussion on using poll. And if you don't know about Joe Good and Sarah Stevenson from American Strategies, and if today's endorsement wasn't enough, hopefully you'll get a lot more and you'll learn a lot about them. But thanks to everybody for the time. I'm sorry if there was any issues with my microphone here, but thank you again. And thank you for all the work that you do, and appreciate your time, and happy Friday, everybody. And we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.